Hi everyone, my name is Vince Galman. Thank you so much for joining me today. I used to travel extensively and lead keynotes and workshops for professional caregivers. They were my primary audience, and they were early childhood educators, nurses, people in different professional roles within healthcare. There were social workers as well, just different nonprofits I worked with, different crown corporations, and my audience was pretty much mostly caregivers, professional caregivers, wonderful, good-hearted people, and people who were slipping on a slippery slope from caregiving to caretaking. And this is what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the difference between caregiving and caretaking and what happens to us, what happens to our health, what happens to the way we interact with people when we move from caregiving to caretaking, and where does this come from, this pattern of caretaking, which is very different than caregiving. If we look at the word caretaking, it's in the word itself. I'm caring, but I'm taking simultaneously. There's a transaction taking place, whereas caregiving, I'm giving purely from my heart because I want to give, because it's who I am to give, and I don't need anything back from you. But with caretaking, there is a subtle, unspoken, unconscious contract or agreement that I'm going to give to you, but I want or need something back from you. So let me jump into this right away. Let me give you a very clear example of this. So caretaking, and you may relate to this as a recovering caretaker who's blossomed into a caregiver. So here's my example, and this could be within healthcare, social work, early childhood education, or any other professional caregiving arena. I care because I want to feel needed. I care because I want to feel needed. And if I feel needed, I feel valued. And if I feel valued, I feel of worth. I feel worthy. And then I feel loved. I'm going to say that one more time. If I care for this person or this group of people, I feel needed. And if I feel needed, I feel valued. I feel of worth. I feel loved. So right there, you can begin to see the transaction. I'm giving because I want something back. I want something back. I want to feel needed by you. By you. Now, where does this pattern come from? There's different places to look. And I want to say right from the beginning that because we don't come in here as blank slates, we incarnate as souls, not as blank slates. We bring in some of these patterns with us. But a key area that I want to look at with you, of course, is adverse childhood experiences or conditioning within childhood. And I have 5 areas that I want to name, and I may come up with more spontaneously, we'll see, but I've written them down and I want to go through some of them with you to help elucidate where this pattern of caretaking comes from, where this transaction comes from, where this need comes from. This need to be needed, this need to be valued. And some of you may already know, but I'm going to go through this already. I'm going to go through this with you right now. So number 1 is, and I seem to talk about this in almost every second video, but we must return to attachment theory. And we must remember that as children, to survive adversity, we sacrifice authenticity for attachment. We sacrifice authenticity for whatever secure or seemingly secure bond or connection we can get with our primary attachment figures. If attachment is under threat, if being me, my natural, exuberant, playful, loving, joyous, bubbly self is a threat to attachment, is a threat to mom or dad being kind to me feeling safe with them, me getting attention, if me being who I am is a threat to that attachment, then I have to sacrifice as a survival adaptation, as a relationally oriented child. I must sacrifice who I am to get whatever sense of secure attachment I can get. So this means for many people growing up, and perhaps you, that I must become pleasing. I must become overly giving. I must be overly caring, right? I must give and give and give. And sacrifice the me that wants to just be silly and focused on me. Because that's what kids do, is they're good at being very self-centered. They're good at just taking care of themselves and doing what they want to do, and and they don't want to wash their hands before dinner, and they're quite happy being covered in mud, and they're quite happy interrupting conversations. It's about them at that young age, beautifully so. But we learn as kids that it's not safe. For different reasons, we learn that it's not safe to be me and to have things be about me. And I now have to be overly focused on how to be different to make them happy, how to please them, how to make sure they're happy, because if they're happier, then I'm safer. If they're happier, they're nicer to me, I get more attention. So I need to be overly pleasing, overly caring, a false sense of caring, a type of caring that's rooted in fear, right? Not a true spontaneous caring, but a caring of I need to be overly careful. Okay, so we sacrifice who we are to be, for the attachment, for whatever semblance of attachment we can get. We sacrifice who we are to become something that we are not, to be a certain way, to be pleasing, etc., etc. A second reason, which is similar to this, is that if we grow up in a very toxic home environment, a very unpredictable home environment, what we often do as kids is we try to harmonize that environment. We become like peacemakers. If only, you may relate to this, it's like I'm energetically trying to, or verbally trying to harmonize, take care of the space so I feel more safe. And so everything around me is just better. Everything's just better. Everyone's nicer to each other. If we can all just get along. So at the age of 5 or 6, kids end up playing the role of harmonizer or peacemaker. Again, they're focusing on other people and taking care of other people when they really should be focusing on themselves and outside playing. Number 3 is that in certain homes, people grow up where there's a very strong work ethic. There's a high value of being a hard worker. For instance, if you're raised on a farm, I've seen this in my clients where it was about, get on that farm at 6 a.m. and go lift the hay and feed the cows. And I don't know, I'm not a farmer, you can tell. But it's about being a responsible little adult when you're 5 years old. Being a responsible little adult when you're 5 years old, having a strong work ethic, and having a strong work ethic is more valued than having a strong desire to play unsupervised and without structure. And what better place to do that than a big farm, right? Or in wide open fields. So that there's these very strong values of you need to work hard and you need to be diligent and focused when you're a young kid can really make kids become responsible little adults at a young age, and that can foster an attitude of needing to take care of things, which can really birth that caretaking attitude. Okay. Number 4 is that if there's a separation in the family, if dad leaves mom, because in my experience, usually it is dad leaving mom, and mom is the one who's now the sole parent. So if there's a separation between the parents, or if one parent passes away, and let's say you're the oldest of, say, 3 or 4, well, suddenly what can happen is you take on the role of the second parent. Dad passes away, or dad has left, or mom passes away, or mom has left. There's one parent now, and you as a 9-year-old with a 7-year-old, 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old sibling, you start being, again, a responsible little adult. You start playing the role of caretaking, taking care of others, even though you don't really want to. You start being a responsible little adult when really what you long for is to play. Okay, but now you're folding laundries and you're helping mom cook when really you'd rather be doing something else. The school system, I'll also add, does really push this need to be and act responsibly. And I'm going to be more specific than that, because so much of the curriculum is developmentally inappropriate. It really is developmentally inappropriate. It is teaching left brain curriculum to children who are right brain dominant, because the right brain develops first, and whose left brain hasn't fully developed yet. And we're teaching them left brain academics, left brain, reading, writing, and arithmetic, when what they really thrive in is play-based learning, heart-based learning, right brain-based learning. But because we're pushing this academic curriculum on them, it's really getting them to become like little adults when they're in grade 1 or 2, when really they need to be little kids, ideally outside playing and not sitting at a desk learning stuff that they're never even going to use. Because really, what percentage of all curriculum is actually used? So the fifth reason is really to do with belief systems that come from our parents, that our parents inculcate into us, that the church inculcates into us, that is in the collective field. And a very common belief is idle hands are the work of the devil. Did any of you grow up with that belief, that idle hands are the work of the devil? That's a very old, it's a very olden days belief, isn't it? But another way of saying this is there are great numbers of people who are raised to believe that it's bad to put yourself first. It's bad to put yourself first, or you must always put other people's needs ahead of your own. You see how these beliefs are built around guilt and shame? It's about guilt and shame. And this is why, putting this all together, we have so many people who have such a hard time saying no, who have such a hard time with personal balance, who have a hard time putting their needs ahead of others. And so what happens is that we are molded and groomed and conditioned to be caretakers, not caregivers. In other words, we're not giving because we want to. We're giving because we need to. Because in different ways, because we didn't get our emotional needs met, we didn't get our heart needs met, our attachment needs met, we didn't get our needs met for play, we're now trying to get those needs met in our professional roles. Remember, I give because it makes me feel needed, and then I feel valued and of worth and loved. And so now our professional role is a tool, a vehicle for filling an empty void. And when it becomes a tool and a vehicle for filling an empty void, then what happens is people get very addicted to their role. They get stuck in it. They become overly trapped in it in 16-hour days, which which is really normal within the health profession, especially today, where you have nurses or doctors working 16-hour days and burning out and hardly spending enough time with their family. And a part of this is because of a heavy workload, and that's certainly true in the last 2 years. In some locations, not all locations. So I don't want to be black and white here, but it has been true in certain locations. So part of it is to do with workload, but a big part of what drives this addictive behavior to keep giving and giving is because it's coming from a deficit within. It's coming from a need to take and take and take, because we're trying so hard to fill a void. We're trying so hard to fill an empty cup that this patient or this child in my daycare or this family that I'm working with in my social services profession cannot fill. They cannot fill that empty cup. Speaking of cups, well, it's more like a big mug. So is this making sense, what I'm saying to you? So we have to understand that caretaker and its variations of pleaser, harmonizer, peacemaker, what else do I got here? Stabilizer, or being a rock. These are all emotional roles, and you are not your role. You are not your role. This is the confusion. You're not your role. Here's what's really important to understand is that these roles are survival adaptations that saved us, that saved you, that saves people. Because if I am a harmonizer, if I am a pleaser at home in this very unpredictable, unsafe environment where I'm not getting my attachment needs met, it saves me. As an attachment-driven child who sacrifices authenticity for attachment in order to survive, who becomes a certain way, becomes pleasing, becomes a caretaker, becomes a harmonizer in order to survive, these roles save us. They save us, because what happens if we don't take on that role? How much kindness are we going to get from our parents? How much love, how much safety, how much attention are we going to get? So what I want to say is it's very important that we do not judge these roles and go, oh, I'm just a pleaser, or she's just a pleaser. No, these roles are sacred. And I mean that. Really take that to heart. These are sacred roles because they saved you. You needed to be a certain way to survive. The challenge is that we identify with that role, and then we find professions to fulfill that role. I become a professional at my survival adaptation. And I may find a partner, a life partner, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, who lets me fulfill that role where I get to keep being pleasing and pleasing to that person, and nothing is ever good enough for them. And that's a gift that nothing's ever good enough for that person, because in a way they're saying to you, hey, you're not a pleaser. And the way I'm going to communicate that to you is by letting you know that nothing's enough. In other words, it won't work because it's not the truth of who you are. So we identify with this survival adaptation. We think it's me, and then we find personal and professional places, opportunities to fulfill that role. You are not your survival adaptation. But here's what's important. You're not a pleaser, but you still get to be pleasing, right? You're not a harmonizer, but you still get to be harmonizing. In other words, you don't have to be a noun. You can be a verb. You can be a verb, a beautiful, fluid verb. You see, with a noun, there's rigidity. With verb, there's fluidity. And what is health? Health is a fluid state. It's a fluid state. And children demonstrate that to us, don't they? They show us how to be fluid by going from sad to angry to joyful to playful to still all within a minute. That's fluidity. That's mastery. They show us by one day wanting to become a fireman, the next day wanting to be a rock star, and the next day wanting to be a fairy princess. That's fluidity. That's mastery. And as I've talked about in previous videos, it's juggling, being a good juggler, not holding on to anything too tightly, which is what these times now demand, by the way, because things are changing so much. We can't hold on to anything too long. So this is about recognizing that you are not a noun, but you get to continue being a verb. You get to be a pleaser. Let me say this again. You get to be pleasing, and then you get to switch to being something else. And you get to move from one thing to another to another. You see, if you're attached to that survival identity, because it saved you and it's rooted in fear and maybe shame, remember, it saved you. Can you see how much harder it is to say no? How much harder it is to put yourself first? Because it is so enmeshed in your wiring. But it's not who you are. So what I want to say to you, as an act of healing, an act of ceremonial healing, what you can do, and you can make this a ceremony, is you pay homage to how this role has served and saved you. You pay homage to how this role has served and saved you. Maybe you get a piece of paper out, a journal, and you write down all the different ways in gratitude, heartfelt gratitude. Dear role of pleaser, dear role of caretaker, dear role of stabilizer, thank you for saving my life. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for helping me get by and survive what was a truly toxic and unpredictable home. Thank you for helping me get whatever sort of attachment I could get from my stressed out mother, my stressed out father, who also likely grew up in homes where they didn't get their attachment needs met. Homes that might have been more toxic. But make this about you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then what you can do is you can just burn that piece of paper in a fire, a sacred fire, and you say goodbye to that role. You say goodbye to it. But you also make note of what it means for you to be a verb, what it means for you to be pleasing and not have to be stuck in a noun of pleaser. What does this liberate you to choose? For instance, now you can say no to people that you would normally say yes to. Maybe you can leave work on time instead of being 3 hours overtime. You can spend more time with your kids, or you can spend more time alone in the woods. What is this allowing you to say yes to and no to that maybe you couldn't say before because you were so identified with this survival adaptation, this survival identity? And survival is the right word because it was about survival. So healing is a movement towards fluidity, flow, letting go, not holding on, not gripping. Look at a trauma physiology. What is a trauma physiology? What are the expressions of a trauma physiology? It's a breath that isn't fully expressed. It's a tightened constricted breath. It's a tightened, constricted physiology, shoulders going up, which is one reason why people have so many shoulder problems and neck problems, is because when we're scared as kids, our shoulders go up. Our breath shortens. So a trauma psychophysiology is very contracted. It's very contracted. It's a black and white thinking and very tight musculature. Okay, it's very narrowed, very narrowed. So healing is about expansiveness, expanding our range of options, expanding our capacity to be a choice in the world, our ability to say yes and no, and the ability to move from being a caretaker to a caregiver that gives not because we need anything from the other person, but because I give, because I love to give, and because I love you and I care about you and I want to give. You see, when it's caretaking, it really is a codependent relationship in a way. They're dependent on you, this patient of yours, or this family that you're working with in your social services work. They're dependent on you, but you're dependent on them. You need something from them. So it becomes, in different ways, a codependent relationship. That is one way to understand why healthcare in particular, and actually social services as well, it can be very toxic, these environments, because they're very entrenched and meshed, messy relationships filled with people who have not done their healing work and are so dependent on the other. So much of caretaking is a pattern of avoiding our pain. It's a pattern of avoiding my pain. I give and I give and I give because I'm trying so hard to avoid the amount of pain I have inside. But when you heal your pain, when you go and you do the heroic inner work of healing, alchemizing, transmuting, clearing your trauma, clearing your programming, then you're less driven by these unconscious imprints, and you're more driven from your heart, from the goodness that is you. And I just want to say that again, I never met a professional caregiver who had a tendency to caretake, who didn't also come from their heart. There's hearts in all the caregivers that I worked with who were also struggling with caretaking. There was heart in all of them. There's heartfelt intent. It wasn't just coming from fear and shame and unprocessed wounds. But there was a lot of unprocessed patterning around the need to be responsible, the need to put others first. So the last thing I want to say to you is that part of the fear of releasing this role that has saved you and served you is, who am I then? Who am I then if I'm not a caretaker? Who am I then if I'm not a pleaser? Because again, when that survival adaptation, that survival identity forges into our psyche, it really formulates an identity. This is who I am. So much so that I seek out relationships, personal and professional, that I can fulfill that role in. And so we identify with that role. We believe that's who I am, who we are. And so there can be a fear underneath, which is, well, who am I if I'm not that? Who am I if I'm not a caretaker? And so that is part of the healing work. That's part of the ceremonial release, that this is actually not who you are. This is who you had to be. You're not a noun, you're a verb. And remember, if that fear comes up that says, well, who am I then? You don't have to get rid of the ing. You get to be pleasing, even though you let go of the attachment to the pleaser. You get to be harmonizing, even though you let go of the attachment, the identification with harmonizer. You get to continue, you get to be fluid in who you are, like a child. And that's really what it means to be alive, is you're fluid. You're open, you're receptive. It's an abundant state of being in this world. And then you have so much more vitality in you. You have so much more you can give, and your service work can just go to an entirely different level because you are not caretaking, you are caregiving. You can serve people from much more pure state of being. So I hope that message was of service to you. And if you are looking for support with your healing and empowerment, please consider my online healing and activation ceremonies, which I do most weekends. I have 2 more this weekend, and I will put a link in the description. They're online, they're on Zoom. And thank you so much for listening and watching. And please subscribe, share, like, comment, all that jazz. Take good care. Blessings.